never failed the next night when you returned to thank me. It's been about 8 years and people say, do I miss it?
Towards the end of his life, Joey Bishop spilt the beans about the Rat Pack. Frank Sinatra was their major comic, but something was terribly wrong behind the scenes. He had turned down million-dollar offers and was shockingly removed from Hollywood history due to his betrayal. This is the true tale of the most beloved comedy trio in America and their efforts to conceal the truth. Joseph Abraham Gottlieb, better known as Joey Bishop, was born in the Bronx, New York on February 3, 1918. His immigrant Jewish family had 5 children, the youngest of whom was him. Jacob was a bicycle repairman by trade, and Anna was the housekeeper. Living was easy yet challenging. The Joey family relocated to South Philadelphia when Joey was just 3 months old. He spent his formative years there, and the city set the tone for his life. Everyone appeared to know someone in South Philadelphia, and the neighborhood was very close-knit. The streets were lively and full of energy. Joey was raised in an environment where comedy was prevalent, thanks to his Italian and Jewish cultures. Everyone was making fun of one another, putting their difficulties into exaggerated perspective and teasing each other. He took it all in. He had a talent for bringing a smile on people's faces from a young age on. At first, he did little impressions of well-known performers, such as Jimmy Durante and Edward G. Robinson. Tap dancing and playing instruments like the banjo and mandolin were among his interests. Although he excelled at performing, he struggled in the classroom. He dropped out of school at the age of 18 due to financial concerns for his family, since he was having trouble keeping up with his classmates. In order to support his family, he worked at his father's bike repair business. Joey helped out around the house by taking on various tasks, but he was constantly planning for the future. He seen firsthand the power of humor to unite individuals. He found a way to make his friends laugh by acting out instructor voices and by observing his neighbors and making fun of their eccentricities. He laid the groundwork for a comedic career unwittingly. He never left his house, even though he was in a tight financial situation. Because of his natural charisma, his family always supported his artistic pursuits. The subtlety and ease with which he delivered his humor set him apart from the crowd. He had this knack for telling jokes that made them more hilarious when he kept his expression unfaltering. His eventual success in show business was largely due to such technique. Joey aspired to be a serious comedian, but he found it difficult to begin. He eagerly sought out any opportunity to perform by entering amateur tournaments. When he entered a local contest in 1936 to mimic radio comedy, he won $3. Although it was little, it served to affirm his uniqueness. Vaudeville was where he initially found success. He and his brother Maury were known as the Bishop Trio in their comedic performance. Their driver, Glenn Bishop, was the one who suggested the name. They changed their name to the Bishop Brothers after adding more artists. They went across New Jersey and Pennsylvania performing at burlesque houses and smaller clubs. There were a lot of problems with performing in these venues, including loud audiences, poor compensation, and Joey's constant struggle for attention. But that simply served to elevate him. He mastered the art of room reading and adapted his humor accordingly. He didn't waste a second if a procedure wasn't producing the desired results. He wasn't like other comedians of his day. He avoided slapstick and over-the-top jokes. His incisive yet understated sense of humor proved a hit with audiences. The performance was brief. They lost one member to enlistment in the armed forces as World War II broke out. Not long after that, Joey also received a call to serve. He enlisted in the United States Army in 1942 and is now a sergeant in the Special Operations Division. His comedic talent served him well even in the military, where he amused soldiers and boosted morale. He gained self-assurance in a different way after performing for his fellow troops. Joey Bishop came back to comedy after World War II with a renewed focus. He was a member of a musical comedy group called the Bishop Brothers before the war. However, he was left to fend for himself in 1941 when his companions were enlisted. He persisted under his stage persona and continued to rely on his lightning-fast comebacks and witty banter to distinguish himself. He did not squander any time returning to the stage after leaving the military in 1945. He got his start playing at New Jersey's Casablanca Roadhouse and other smaller venues. Very few people showed up, but he saw each performance as an opportunity to get better. Joey's comedic approach differed from the boisterous and untamed humor that was common during that period. He maintained a level head and avoided cheesy jokes and grand gestures. He spoke in an intimate manner, poked fun at himself, and discovered humor in the mundane. His career took off in a flash, and he soon found himself playing in New York City hotspots like the Latin Quarter and Greenwich Village. As a young comic in the 1940s, he was making a substantial $11,000 each week. Meanwhile, the rise of television was making it the most popular platform for performers. Because this was his next move, Bishop jumped at every opportunity. In 1950, he began making appearances on variety shows, such as The Ed Sullivan Show, which brought him widespread recognition. But in 1952, when Frank Sinatra entered a bar and seen him play, he finally broke through. At the Latin Quarter, Sinatra happened to be in the audience as Bishop was performing. His timing and delivery were what really piqued Sinatra's interest. An invitation to perform as Frank Sinatra's opening act at Bill Miller's Riviera in Fort Lee, New Jersey, came to Bishop after the performance. Not long after that, he was doing a performance at New York's Copacabana. Some of the nation's most prestigious venues were these. A kingmaker in his own right, Sinatra was more than a celebrity. For Bishop, it was a case of doors opening because he liked her. His unique talent set him apart from other comedians, and the moniker Sinatra's comic stuck. However, he wasn't simply capitalizing on Sinatra's celebrity. Never once was his humor harsh or overbearing. Neither did he depend on craziness or belittle others. On the contrary, he managed to make the audience feel like they were laughing together with him. Speaking to the audience as folks was one of his greatest moves, since it brought the performance to a more intimate level. He was more than simply a jokester. He was a storyteller. When he recounted stories from his youth, he managed to make them sound funnier than they actually were. Using his cousin as a sledge during the winter was one of his favorite phrases, which related to his family's poverty. It succeeded despite its simplicity. Because they recognized a truth in it, they found it funny. When stand-up comedy was at its peak, Bishop stood out due to his magnetic stage presence and magnetic ability to connect with audiences. He exuded confidence and composure despite the chaos around him. Even though he had just begun his profession, he was already demonstrating that he could get everyone to laugh without raising their voices. Joey Bishop was the Rat Pack's unsung hero. Bishop toiled away in the shadows, molding the comedic timing and maintaining the sharpness of Sinatra, Martin, and Davis Jr.'s performance. He provided a comic counterpoint to the group's flamboyant personas with his easygoing humor. They dubbed him the Frown Prince due to his grave countenance, but it was his comedic timing that truly set their shows apart. He first became involved with the Rat Pack in the early 1950s. His performance at Manhattan's Latin Quarter left an impression on Sinatra. Bishop had a gift for making jokes sound effortless. The decision to have Bishop perform as Sinatra's opening act was a game-changer for Bishop's career. Performing for sold-out audiences and rubbing elbows with A-list Hollywood luminaries, Bishop quickly became a fixture in Sinatra's orbit. The Rat Pack performed at their best in 1960. They were more than simply a band. They were an icon in their own right. The Sands Hotel's showroom was often packed with fans anxious to witness their famed late-night events, which featured a medley of musical performances, comedic skits, and surprising antics. Bishop wrote a lot of the content, which most people didn't realize. The feel-good, natural banter and humor of the programs were all his own. He was gifted at bringing out the best in every member, creating an impression that everything happened at the spur of the moment. But off-camera, he made sure everything went off without a hitch. Bishop remained mostly unsung despite his significant influence on the group's comedic tone. The main attractions, the ones everybody came to see, were Sinatra and Martin. It seemed like Bishop wasn't bothered in the least. He was the rock that stopped everything from falling apart. With a well-placed one-liner, Bishop restored order whenever the performance veered off course or the jokes became too extreme. His comedic timing provided the ensemble with a much-needed framework that would have been difficult to replicate. Even off-stage, he was an integral part of the Rat Pack. He contributed to the group's chemistry in films like Sergeant 3 and Ocean's 11 with his humorous timing. The 1961 inauguration dinner he staged for John F. Kennedy was a watershed point in his career. The Rat Pack's impact was on full display at this event, since they had been staunch advocates of Kennedy's campaign. It was more than a performance. It was a turning point in time. The night needed a host, and Bishop was the one to provide, skillfully combining the formality of the event with humor. He was very brilliant at it. It was a brief moment, but it demonstrated Bishop's significance when he glanced at the Kennedys and remarked, "I told you I'd get you a good seat." The audience adored it. Without attempting, he could stand before the nation's most influential individuals and make them laugh. Trouble was simmering behind the scenes as Joey Bishop rode high with the Rat Pack. His once strong connection with Frank Sinatra began to deteriorate in the early 1960s. When Sinatra requested Bishop to step in at the Calneva Lodge, a resort that Sinatra partially owned, the tension reached a breaking point. Sinatra assumed Bishop would be very faithful and would seize the opportunity. But instead of taking it, Bishop presented a demand list that included a private plane and $50,000. This was quite unjust. Sinatra was instrumental in Bishop's rise to fame by securing his membership in the Rat Pack. It irritated Sinatra that Bishop was now behaving as though he were doing the singer a favor. The foundation of Sinatra's success was loyalty, and he expected nothing less from his fans. I felt betrayed by Bishop's demands. He was abruptly cut short by Sinatra. Bishop did not belong to the Rat Pack. Sinatra ensured that he was removed from significant initiatives. It wasn't simply about losing his place in the group. Bishop was substituted with Robin and the Seven Hoods, whose involvement had been initially intended. He was no longer welcome, and that was the message. Bishop was hurt badly by this. Being on the outside meant he was much more of an outcast than he had been before. His insistence had backfired. He did not acquire any respect. On the contrary, he lost everything. He became resentful as a result of the consequences, and not only towards Sinatra but towards the entire business. Despite his best efforts, he seemed to be perpetually overshadowed. Another member of the Rat Pack, Peter Lawford, could relate to that sentiment. Although his challenges were unique, they were equally excruciating. Lawford had unique standing in Hollywood as a result of his relationship with John F. Kennedy, but his political connections occasionally interfered with his acting career. They didn't fight directly, but he and Bishop were both on the outside looking in. As time went on, Bishop felt increasingly rejected. Major events did not include him. Among the most heartbreaking events was when a big charity event was picked to be hosted by Johnny Carson instead of Bishop. His replacement had arrived. Without him, the entertainment industry continued to progress. Bishop will never forget how it felt. Although he was guarded about discussing the events directly, he did make passing references to feeling underappreciated in interviews. The media painted him as someone who had lucked into becoming a member of the Rat Pack, rather than someone who had worked his way up. He despised this portrayal. Years later, that still hurt. The past followed Bishop everywhere he went. He went on to have a successful career, but the Rat Pack was always there. His wound from being driven out of something legendary never completely healed, even if he had been a part of it. Joey Bishop was able to maintain his prominence at all times. There were low points in his career, but he never stopped trying to improve. His 1961 role as Joey Barnes, a public relations worker in Hollywood, was based on his own life, and he appeared in the sitcom The Joey Bishop Show. The show allowed him to display his comedic talents, but it had ratings issues right from the start. After airing in black and white for the first season, NBC decided to go color for the second season, which really made an impact. Notable TV personalities Sheldon Leonard and Danny Thomas produced it, making it one of the earliest color sitcoms. Abby Dalton was Joey's wife, and Corbett Monica was his closest buddy. Both actors were excellent in the program. The program never really took off, even with guest stars like Jimmy Durante and Andy Williams. It was canceled by NBC in 1964. CBS decided to take a chance and reintroduce the show in black and white after picking it up. People had become used to watching TV in color at that point, and turning back seemed like a bad idea. A year after the show's debut, CBS permanently canceled it despite the presence of famous guest actors like Sammy Davis Jr. and Peter Lawford. Comedian Von Meter, who was famed for playing the role of John F. Kennedy, was involved in one of the most peculiar episodes of the show's history. He taped a segment for The Joey Bishop Show on November 15, 1963. A week subsequent to the assassination of John F. Kennedy, NBC chose not to broadcast the program, and it was subsequently never shown. It has been a mystery ever since. Joey Bishop became a well-known TV personality thanks to the show, even if it wasn't a smash hit. That wasn't all. He tackled an even more challenging task in 1967. The Joey Bishop Show, his late-night discussion show on ABC, was named for him. The late-night television king Johnny Carson was his opponent this time. Many have attempted and failed to compete with The Tonight Show before him. It was a difficult struggle. Bishop's program was distinct in its tone, which was friendlier and more casual. By hiring Regis Philbin as his sidekick, he helped launch Philbin's career on national television. Interviews with famous people, comedic sketches, and musical performances were all part of the program. Occasionally, unexpected appearances were made by members of the Rat Pack, including Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., and Peter Lawford. The ratings were never that high, though. People who watched Carson didn't want to transfer networks, but Bishop was a master at attention-getting. Regis Philbin made headlines in July 1968 when he abruptly left the program while live on television, citing his frustration with the network's criticism and his fear that he was limiting the show's potential. The scene shocked onlookers and garnered media attention. It came to light later that Bishop had orchestrated the whole thing as a PR hoax. People were interested in seeing what happened next, so it worked for a while. The show's ratings spike, however, were short-lived, and ABC canceled it after only 2 seasons in 1969. Bishop continued to be a recognized presence on television even after his late-night show ended. Just before launching his own program, Johnny made a triumphant return to his previous post as a guest presenter on The Tonight program. As a result, Bishop was frequently called upon to step in for Carson, who had few other suitable candidates. Joey Bishop grew increasingly alone as the decade progressed in the 1970s. There was a new wave of comedians emerging, and they weren't like him at all. The comedy industry was evolving rapidly. At the head of the pack were Richard Pryor and George Carlin. Not only were they making statements with their jokes, but they were also bringing a raw and honest sense of humor to real-life challenges. Pryor was quite forthcoming about his history, including his difficult upbringing and battles with drugs. His stories were more than humorous. They evoked strong emotions and were authentic. In contrast, Carlin took aim at society and politics with his biting observations, which provoked thought alongside laughter. Clever wit and lightning-fast comebacks had propelled Bishop to stardom. His comedic timing was ideal for late-night television and nightclubs, but it seemed stale now. People wanted to see new things, confrontational comedy, more personal jokes. Bishop was uninterested in becoming that type of comic. He had to deal with more than just the change in comedy. He had always had a rocky relationship with Sinatra, and his stint with the Rat Pack was ended. Keeping up with the times became much more challenging without the same network of contacts within the sector. The younger generation wasn't only displacing him, they were also oblivious to his existence. Bishop nearly vanished from the public eye in the 1980s. His cinematic roles were few and far between. He had a little part in the 1986 action flick The Delta Force, which featured Chuck Norris. Despite the film's success, Bishop's performance went unrecognized. His son Larry Bishop directed the 1996 film Mad Dog Time, in which he had an appearance. Despite being an independent endeavor, it failed to reassert his star power. Years of disappointment led to his departure from the entertainment industry, which was caused by more than simply a lack of job. He was out of touch after losing the Rat Pack, and his intransigence caused him to lose influence. Bishop had not changed, but comedy had progressed. His once adoring public had long since forgotten him. Sylvia Russa was Joey Bishop's bride in 1941. After 58 years of marriage, Sylvia died of cancer in 1999. Through all of Hollywood's ups and downs, their marriage stood strong. The lifestyle that Bishop led as a member of the Rat Pack, which included frequent performances with Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr., could put a strain on any marriage, even when he was away for extended periods of time for work. His supporter, Sylvia, nevertheless, was strong. While Bishop traveled the nation, she took care of the household, nurtured their kid, and ensured that their family remained strong. Their trusting friendship allowed them to overcome extended periods of separation and reconnect with one another. The demands of fame didn't get to Sylvia because she had a quiet resilience that held everyone together. Sylvia was the rock that supported Bishop, even though he was the center of attention. In 1948, Larry was born, their only son. He had a Hollywood upbringing but ultimately struck out on his own. Going to Beverly Hills High School and going on to become an actor, writer, and director was his decision, not to depend on his famous father. Wild in the Streets and the Savages were his early parts that garnered him notoriety. Thereafter, he directed Mad Dog Time and Hell Ride. His connection with Bishop was never really tight, despite the fact that they both pursued a similar route. Because Bishop was often on stage or filming, their personal lives suffered as a result. Although they held one another in high regard, an intense emotional bond did not exist between them. The relationship between Larry and his father was always cold and formal, despite Larry's claims that his father had a significant impact on his career. Not only was Joey Bishop known for his wit and sharp tongue, but he also stood out among the Rat Pack because he abstained from drugs and alcohol. Bishop maintained his distance from the wild lifestyle that Sinatra, Martin, and Davis Jr. were famous for. Knowing how quickly celebrity may lead to self-destruction, he opted to remain level-headed. His need for dominance was more fundamental than any sense of superiority. Even when gatherings went late into the morning, Bishop was the one who kept his composure, and his friends admired that. Following Sylvia's passing, everything shifted. She had been the rock that he could always rely on, the one who kept him grounded in reality outside of Hollywood. She was her anchor, and he started to pull away. He was more reclusive and hardly went out. After losing Sylvia, his health took a further nosedive. The tranquility of his Newport Beach house served as an escape from the turmoil of his past. The history of that house was unique. A terrible storm befell Bishop and Sylvia as they sailed away from Mexico in the late 1970s. Severe weather, including 60 miles per hour winds and 16-foot seas, befell them. Finally reaching Newport Beach's Balboa Bay Club, they narrowly avoided danger. Their decision to purchase a home on Leo Isle was swiftly influenced by that unforgettable encounter. They found solace there, away from the mayhem of Hollywood. Joey Bishop never felt like an equal, even though he was the only surviving member of the Rat Pack. While the rest of the group sang and performed, he kept everyone in the crowd in stitches as the comic. Although Sinatra once referred to him as the hub of the big wheel, implying his significance, Bishop never believed that the group genuinely saw him in that light. For a long time, he felt that he was the most unappreciated member. Something disturbed him every time he read a book about the Rat Pack. His name appeared very infrequently, maybe even less frequently than Peter Lawford's. It was difficult to accept that. The situation was exacerbated in an article by journalist Earl Wilson, who said that Bishop treated Sinatra like an outsider and only spent time with him when invited. Duke had a better idea. He knew his role. He wasn't in charge, but he was crucial to the success of their shows. He didn't attend because Sinatra was being kind to him. He belonged there. Bishop remained loyal to Sinatra despite these setbacks. He held Sinatra in high esteem and enjoyed bringing up the fact that, above all else, Sinatra prized honesty. A young woman's desire to meet Sinatra was the subject of one of Bishop's beloved anecdotes. Sinatra was nice and respectful towards her, and he didn't dismiss her but instead gave her an opportunity. Stories like those were relayed by Bishop so that people might know Sinatra for who he really was, not just the untamed, inflated version. It was widely believed that Bishop placed a premium on loyalty. For that reason, he declined to pen a tell-all book following Sinatra's death. Despite receiving millions of dollars from publishers, he refused to divulge any of their secrets. To him, it amounted to treachery. He was not about to give up on the remarkable thing that the Rat Pack had created simply because the world was interested in rumors. Bishop felt the same way about the twisting of their legacy. People paid more attention to the scandals, intoxication, and parties than to the actual influence of the Rat Pack. They advocated for racial equality and revolutionized the entertainment industry. After hotels in Sin City refused to accommodate Sammy Davis Jr. due to his race, the Rat Pack vowed not to play there again until things changed. Bishop hoped that the public would always recall stories like that. Even his own profession wasn't without its ups and downs. Although his late-night chat show was unsuccessful, he was the star of the 4-year Joey Bishop show. When Johnny Carson was in charge of late-night television, his staff made sure that famous people didn't appear on Bishop's show, which damaged Bishop's ratings. His feelings of forgetfulness persisted even after he was a part of the Rat Pack. Although he was the one responsible for injecting comedic moments into their performances, not everyone noticed. Some may have even thought of him as a lucky extra. He was never satisfied with that impression. Even though he was frustrated, Bishop was proud of his accomplishments. Making others laugh was his life's work, and it was irreplaceable. His health was deteriorating by 2005. 2 years later, on October 17, 2007, at the age of 89, he passed unexpectedly after becoming too bewildered to finish one of his last interviews. When he passed away, the original Rat Pack was no more. The legacy of Joey Bishop was complex. He often felt underappreciated despite being a member of one of the most illustrious performing groups in history. His character was never defined by resentment, though. No matter how much the world tried to discredit him, he never wavered from his ideals, never betrayed his friends, and never lost faith in the value of what they had created. Knowing he had contributed to something extraordinary was ultimately satisfying.